Welcome to another marketing session of the Law Firm Growth Summit. I am here today, right now in this session with Charles Krugel. Now, Charles and I met by happenstance through LinkedIn. I connected with him, and then I told him I had a podcast. I asked him if he had a story to share. He did. He became a podcast interviewee of mine, and I soon came to find out that he does speaking engagements to grow his firm. And I also found out that he has a LinkedIn group of almost 4,000 people in it, law firm owners, attorneys, and also business clients. So he does business law, and the group it's actually an active group on LinkedIn. So I invite you to check it out. We're going to share that throughout in the episode. I share the name of his group, or ask him to give us the name of his group. So I'm not going to try to do it right now, but I am going to tell you that Charles is talking to us about using speaking engagements to develop business and brand, and he is really good at it. So he's got a lot to share. It's a very actionable interview, and I'm really excited to bring him here to you today and be able to share this. Charles was a late addition to the speaker lineup. I had just simply forgotten that we had this awesome interview in the past when I was reaching out to people for speaking engagements. And then when we were going into promotion mode, I realized that he's got this LinkedIn group, and I reached out to him to see if he could promote. And at the same time, I had a speaker that backed out, and I was able to squeeze Charles into the lineup. And I'm really happy that happened, because it's an amazing session, and I think that some of you are going to really benefit from learning how to use speaking engagements to grow your firm and increase your brand. So with that being said, we're going to cut quickly to an ad from one of our sponsors, and then we'll be right back for our session with Charles Krugel.
GNGF, get noticed, get found. We're a leading marketing agency for law firms, and we literally wrote the book on online law practice strategies. It's our best-selling book, and we're giving it to you absolutely free. Our team does it all from branding and logo design to mobile-first websites, so you can meet your clients wherever they are. We back our clients with experts in organic SEO and paid advertising to give you all the analytics and insights you need to grow the business the way you want it to grow. But what makes GNGF unique is our focus on providing a holistic marketing strategy by working directly with the partners of a law firm to tie real business goals to actionable marketing strategies. That's why we're proud GNGF isn't just an award-winning agency with many website, print, and design awards, but we're most proud of being a perennial best place to work and being honored with the Better Business Torch Award for business ethics. Get your free book today and get noticed, get found.
Welcome to another awesome session here at the Law Firm Growth Summit. I am here with Charles Krugel from the Charles Krugel Labor and Employment Law on behalf of Business Law Firm. And Charles is going to be talking to us about using speaking engagements to develop business and brand. And I first came to know Charles through LinkedIn. We're both active on there. Charles has a very active group on LinkedIn, and we interviewed him here on the podcast. It was episode 32, You're Never Too Busy to Market Your Firm, with Charles Krugel of the Profit with Law podcast. And his story was remarkable as to how he built his firm with speaking engagements. And I'd like to start off with Charles letting us know what that transformation was, what that path was, and just share a bit of his story so that we can set the stage for why you might want to consider speaking engagements, maybe what practice areas would be well adept at that. So Charles, welcome to the summit, and I'm going to let you take the floor and say hello to our audience and let them know a little bit about yourself.
Thanks, Moshe. I appreciate you having me here, and hello, everybody in the audience. I'm happy and pleased to be here with you to discuss this. I basically represent companies, small to medium-sized businesses and not-for-profits in labor and employment law-related matters. A third of my practice is counseling and basically proactive HR counseling advisement on day-to-day HR-related issues. Another third is transactional law, contracts, agreements, NDAs, hiring and firing agreements. And the final third is litigation, both in state and federal courts and before regulatory agencies like the National Labor Relations Board and the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission. The way public speaking and presentations is like one major pillar of my business development strategy. And the way this came to me was purely by luck. I was at a networking event many years ago, like maybe 15, 16 years ago, at DePaul Center in downtown Chicago. That's where DePaul Law School is. And I was just standing around with a drink in my hand, and I turned around and there's somebody from the Community Economic Law Project, the Chicago Law Project. That's part of the Chicago Lawyers for Committee under Civil Rights. And she's an attorney there, and we just started talking, and she asked me if I'd like to do public speaking and presentations. I'm like, sure, this is something, I hadn't really done that before, and this was something I was looking to do now, or with the opportunity, if the right opportunity came to me. And she told me that I'd be presenting at Chicago City Hall, which was kind of remarkable to me because I have no political connections, no people who are like mentors or, who can get me into those types of places. And this was through a third party, the Law Project. So I said, sure. And I started doing one presentation a year with them, and they liked me enough that they started asking me to do 2 presentations a year. And this was like maybe for the first 5, 6 years. And then maybe about 8 years ago or so, they asked me to start doing a series of presentations for a year. And now I've been doing 4 a year. They referred me over to Goldman Sachs for their small business, their 10K small business initiative. And I was doing presentations for them for a few years too. And it started snowballing. Other people started picking me up for presentations. They knew I was a public speaker. I got really good turnout for the presentations at City Hall, and they were very lively discussions, and the feedback was always very positive. So it's something that really came sort of natural, organically, but it's worked out. And it's become a major pillar of my business development strategy.
Now, you're, correct me if I'm wrong, but my recollection is that you are a solo practice, correct?
That's right, 18 years now.
Yeah, so you have managed to use these speaking engagements to grow your solo practice, but growing a solo practice it's still you. So that
Yes.
means you've grown your top line. You've been able to either get more cases or higher value cases or charge more for your work. So talk to us really briefly about the effect that has had on the actual business side of your practice, other than the visibility. Financially, what kind of impact did it have to be getting on these stages?
Well, for example, this year brought me one of my biggest clients. They're a Netherlands-based company with significant operations in Chicago and then in other areas around the country, actually. So California and Iowa. And this was actually through presentations. I met this person maybe 6, 7 years ago at some presentations he attended for another company, actually. And he was at that time, and nothing ever happened with it until this year. I reached out to him about another matter, not related directly to picking up their business, but it was just it was a networking introduction I was looking to make for him. And he started asking me questions about what kind of law I do, which is something that you have to get used to. I don't think people are ever going to like really know much about you from the first time they see you or the second time they see you, which was the case with this person. But it took a long dialogue with us, and it took like 6 months until I finally closed the business with him. And that was basically because of presentations I gave about 8 years ago. I'm not saying that, this is average or typical, but it's just the way some things go. And like I said, it's a big conglomerate that's based out of the Netherlands. So it's an international based business.
So before we go into the how-to, which I think is
Sure.
going to be the meat and potatoes of our session today, comparing this to other marketing initiatives, what is this route free and it's more sweat equity? Is it like what are the benefits of going the speaking engagement route versus other marketing options out there? I mean, there's everything from billboards to online advertising to, there's a lot of marketers here in the summit that are going to be talking about SEO and pay-per-click and, all the fancy Delancey stuff that's going on online right now. But this is like, going back to the basics and getting speaking engagements and getting in front of physical people. So how do we figure out how do we weigh that in the big picture? Because I'm sure that there are people who are attending the session that just are confused about all the options and trying to figure out which one to choose. So I'm hoping that we can help them figure out if this is for them, and the right fit for them.
Sure. So first of all, I'm a B2B attorney, and so the presentations I give are always to business owners and operators, HR practitioners, and a lot of times other attorneys. I do a lot of CLE, continuing legal education presentations too, and panel presentations with other attorneys and practitioners. There is a lot of sweat equity in it. I'm not getting paid for the most part to do these, although this year I did have the potential for an opportunity in Washington, D.C. to do a paid presentation for an organization, but I think my cost was too high for them. At least that's what they told me. There's another company that's based out of the West Coast we're talking about doing some work with. A lot of webinars too. So yeah, I mean, and compared to, I think a billboard will work for a B2C attorney, but for a B2B attorney, and I, like myself, I think it's really key, especially as a solo practitioner. Marketing for me, or at least in my opinion, marketing is a lot of smoke and mirrors. And this is something that makes me look a lot bigger than what I am. I'm doing presentations at Chicago City Hall. Yeah, they have no political connections. I did presentations at Goldman Sachs. I'm doing presentations still for Westlaw. I've done presentations for LexisNexis. So a lot of different organizations and companies. And it really raises my profile. The sweat equity aspect of it, I think, is not so much in getting the gigs, because once you start getting these engagements, I think that it's like a snowball effect. But there is a lot of front end work, at least initially, like maybe 10, 15 years ago, on getting my presentation materials together. You always need to have good presentation materials, PowerPoints, guidebooks, whatever. It's not, and honestly, I don't even know if people read these things, but they're there, and I post them online on my website and then to my LinkedIn group. So there are multiple opportunities to syndicate this stuff. And the same thing with announcing the presentations. Even if, God forbid, I have only one person attend, possibly by advertising it to a broader audience, that it also raises my profile. And by the way, I've never had one person attend. So, but if I did, I would give the same sort of presentation. Also, the speaking style, I think, is important. I do a lot of Q&A. I talk extemporaneously. I don't lecture. I don't stand behind a podium. I don't really often refer to the handout materials. I let the handout materials speak for themselves. And I find this way that it's more engaging for people to do the Q&A type stuff, as opposed, or like a roundtable discussion, as opposed to lecturing. And frankly, if I had a lecture, I'd probably put myself to sleep anyway. So
I got you. So I want to go back and just do a quick recap on what you just said. So first of all, you said that because you're B2B, you think that this lends very well to your audience.
Yeah.
I would just want to put a quick note on that. If our viewers would attend Alexis Katz's session. Alexis Katz teaches estate planning attorneys how to grow their practice, and that is B2C. And her model that she alludes to during her talk, which her talk is not about this, but she mentions it, and she mentions that her model is to do 2 presentations a month. So basically, they're sending out mailers to consumers to invite them to a presentation that is informational for them that they might be interested in, which then leads obviously to getting clients. So I do think that speaking there, you're creating your own stage, but speaking can work well even in B2C. There's proof in the fact that she's built that model and has hundreds of attorneys going through it. So
let me
go ahead.
Comment on that too. Yeah, I agree with you 100%, because I know a lot of people in estate planning, family law, like divorce type stuff, and tax planning and tax law who do B2C presentations, and I see them advertised on billboards or also in the newspaper. So I think it's a good model for them. One also aspect of the presentations from my perspective that's really key for me is everybody talks about networking as being an important business development tool. When you're networking, though, like at an event or among a group, generally you're one of among many people who are attending. When you're doing a presentation, you're the focus of it, and you're presenting to 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, in one case, I think we even had a couple thousand people on a webinar. So it's much different, and you're talking to a much broader audience. And that's why I say it's like marketing is smoke and mirrors, and the presentations make me look bigger than what I am.
Yeah. So what I'm hearing you say is that, number one, it builds authority instantly. So putting you on the stage makes you the figure that people are looking at and saying, okay, he really knows what he's talking about, right? The
Yes.
second thing is that it engages the audience in a way that they are going to remember you.
Yes.
Whereas networking is perhaps not as effective. And the third thing is that it gives that in-person connection. So a lot of the other marketing methods are less personal. They're not getting that face-to-face time with you. Even if you're doing a webinar, it's still like right now, it's virtual, but people who are watching this are getting an affinity to me. They're getting an affinity to you because they're listening to us speak. They're watching us present.
Yes.
So it does that. And what else did what were the other key points? The other thing that I wanted to extract from what you said that I don't think you really harped on is you do a lot of CLEs, which means that you are presenting to attorneys. And I'm assuming that then that means that other attorneys who are not exactly doing what you do are now referring business to you because they know what you do. So it also creates the referrals from within the law practice industry to have business coming your way, where it's not necessarily the customer that's finding you or the client that's finding you, but it's the it's the attorney that they've already found that's now passing the business your way. Are you finding that to be the?
Yeah, there's 2 points along those lines. First of all, it's a soft sell, and then second of all, what you said about other attorneys, I'm getting between 25%, a quarter, and a third of my referrals, client referrals, are from other attorneys, and a lot of maybe half of those attorneys attend presentations that I give or are aware of presentations I give. Oddly enough, I've had other attorneys and providers pick up my materials and then publish those materials, or even some other like law schools have used my materials too as part of their curriculum, which has been kind of interesting to see how that kind of mushrooms the actual materials that I've published from presentations.
Yeah. Now I know that you have a very active group on LinkedIn.
Yeah.
So for those of you who are here, don't even realize that there are groups on LinkedIn. Charles has a group of over 4,000.
No, it's almost 3,700.
Well, it'll be over 4,000 after we mention it here. So he's got a group of almost 4,000 people on LinkedIn, and it's a very active group. And I'm about to ask him a question about it, but real quick, let's just cover the name of it so
Sure.
people can go and find it and join it if it's applicable to them. And then after you share the name, my question to you is how does owning the group play into the strategy of speaking engagements, or is it a completely separate strategy?
All right, the name of the group is Charles Krugel's Labor and Employment Law and Human Resources Practices Group. A very long name, and it runs counterintuitive to, the common advice that's given about social media. But then again, I'm a solo practitioner, and a lot of what I do runs counter to the common conventional wisdom is what they call it. Yeah, it runs counter to conventional wisdom. The same way, I do public speaking at Chicago City Hall without having political connections. And it does play a role in business development and in my speaking engagements because I use the LinkedIn group as a means to syndicate or to announce speaking engagements, and then also to publish the materials from the speaking engagements. And then people comment on it, they'll borrow it on their own, things like that. So it plays a key strategy in my social media marketing.
Okay, awesome. So I think that we did a really good job of setting the stage of what this is, what speaking engagements entails, and why it can be a really good marketing tool for somebody's practice. So we've given them food for thought on whether or not this is something they should do. So I'd like to jump into the how. So real quick, I just want to give an overview of what we're going to cover in the next 30 minutes or so. We're going to talk about how to obtain speaking engagements. We're going to talk about how to promote the speaking engagements. We're going to talk about how to develop or developing handouts and materials. We're going to talk about your style of presentation, and we're going to talk about dealing with difficult questions and disruptions. So let's go right into the first point. How does somebody go about obtaining speaking engagements, especially if they've not done it before?
I think asking providers like chambers of commerce or business associations, because that's where a lot of business, from my standpoint as a B2B attorney, that's where a lot of businesses congregate. But if you're a B2C attorney, then you want to look at other sorts of groups, or maybe parts of chambers of commerce, or the types of chambers where consumers might they go to, they might visit or frequent. You have to ask them. I sometimes send around my materials to them. I'll make a pitch sometimes. I don't make pitches that often anymore, but sometimes what I'll do is I'll make a pitch, or if I know that they know somebody, or maybe they've been referred to me by somebody who I've done presentations for, then I'll send them my materials and make the pitch. A lot of the language I use for the pitch is canned language, so it's not like I'm making it up. I'm putting that much more sweat equity into it. It's really, I'm recycling a lot of my materials. The same materials for my presentations, I recycle a lot of those materials too. What was
Yeah, I want to add to what you just shared. As far as obtaining engagements, one of the things that you might be tempted to do is to look for where you might get the most exposure. And when you're first starting out, and I could tell you this from personal experience, from not just speaking in person in public, but speaking online. When you're first starting out, you want your first couple of engagements to be a small crowd, because it's going to take a while for you to get comfortable on stage, to get comfortable in front of a crowd. And if you aim for a large crowd to begin with, it's just going to be that much more frightening. It's going to, and it might deter you from continuing. So one of the things you might want to do is really consider how to find a small stage, which could be like a local business networking group, or a local, depending on who you're going after. But if you're B2C, or you're in, let's say, estate planning, you might want to find a financial advisor who hosts a luncheon for their clients, and then offer them to do a talk on estate planning for their crowd at that luncheon, which might be a much smaller crowd of 10, 20, 30 people, and you start to get comfortable. So I think that if you aim low, it'll build on itself from there, because then people start to see you in action, and somebody sees you who has a bigger stage, and then that's where it starts to kind of build on itself. What do you think, Charles?
A couple of points on that. First of all, if you're a litigator, giving presentations and public speaking should be natural for you, and if it's not, then maybe you shouldn't be doing litigation. And the second point is, there are companies called speakers bureaus, which are sort of a pay-to-play sort of thing, which I think are good, especially if you're a B2C person as opposed to B2B. But also, for me as a solo attorney, I'm very careful about vetting any sorts of pitches that I get from the pay-to-play sort of model. And I've never done that before. I've never done the speakers bureau. I've never done a pay-to-play thing. So all the presentations I do are free for me. I'm not paying anybody to set it up for me. Also, this is really important too, I think, other organizations set up my presentations for me. I don't set them up myself. That is, to me, even a lot more overhead and sweat equity, is to set up yourself, to get the location, to get food and beverages, and to do all the advertising. So for example, the City of Chicago, they advertise the presentations that I give on their own, and then I could syndicate that on my own too. But they set it up. It's in their offices at City Hall. They provide everything else. The same with any other presentation I give. For webinars, the infrastructure is provided by the company, Lexis or Westlaw or whatever other companies. They're engaging me for webinars. So that's the key thing for me, is that I don't set it up myself. I'm not responsible for purchasing food and beverages. I'm not responsible for making my own copies of my materials. They do that for me. I'm not going to buy my own paper and do all that type of stuff either. So
yeah, this session right here is a perfect example. Charles is a guest here on the Law Firm Growth Summit. We have invested a ton of money and a ton of resources to put this on for you. And he has had to do nothing other than show up here at this specific time that we're talking together, and make sure his lighting and his microphone are good. So, I do like that. There's definitely a place for creating your own events. If you're in estate planning B2C and you need to drum up the business because there's just not enough things happening locally, there's a place for that. But there's certainly opportunities to get on stages that are not your stage, that you don't have to do all that work. So I think that when you start, it's probably a good idea to do a few of those before you think about doing one of your own. So I want to move on to our next point, because we talked about obtaining the speaking engagement. The next thing is promoting the speaking engagement, and this is where I'm after what we just talked about. Wouldn't it be the job of the event to promote the speaking engagement, to promote their event? What is your piece of that promotion, and why is that important?
To me, in my opinion, it's equal. It's 50-50. I mean, normally, though, the people who are setting up the presentation are putting more in than I am. So in all honesty, I mean, maybe, I feel like I'm putting in as much, but probably when push comes to shove, when you count it, I'm not putting in as much. But it is key for me to do the promotion too, because the promotion, instead of going out under somebody else's banner, is then going out under my banner. And something interesting too I've seen is that other people start promoting my events for me too. I met a really good accountant who's a really great networker herself. She calls herself the Dancing Accountant in Chicago, and she promotes the events too. And I contacted her once, and I noticed like she was doing that, promoted like 3 or 4 of my presentations at Chicago City Hall. And I called to thank her, and she invited me to like a chamber event out in one of the Chicago's neighborhoods, and she referred some business to me after that too, and I try to refer business back to her now also. So it is a key thing for networking. And like I said, it's I'm a solo practitioner. I'm a big fish I'm a little fish in a big pond, and this is really a way for me to get out to many more people as opposed to going to networking events and just doing the one-on-one sort of thing. But it doesn't replace one-on-one, because it does work alongside the one-on-one, like I said in the case of this accountant. So
yeah, I want to add to what you just said, because here in this conversation, I am the other 50%, right? I'm on the other side of the table,
yeah.
and I want to share with you from the event host what a difference it makes to us, and what that means to you. So first of all, 50-50, I don't know if I would say that is 50-50 of expense or effort, but I would say that we share responsibility equally on bringing people to the event. So basically, the reason that I as a host am asking you to speak is because I believe that by putting you on my stage, I am going to provide value to my audience, and also I'm going to attract your people. I'm going to attract people who know you, who are now going to show up to my event that I wouldn't be exposed to otherwise. Yeah. So that is the purpose of a host putting you on their stage. If you in turn don't promote the event, you're likely not getting another speaking engagement from that provider.
Exactly.
So, I have 30 speakers at this Law Firm Growth Summit. I know who's promoting and who isn't. The next time I put it on, who am I asking to come back? Is it going to be the person who drove 100 registrations, or is it going to be the person who provided awesome value but didn't tell anybody about it? And I leave that question for you to answer, because I do want to provide value to my audience. That's the purpose of this event. But if I can find somebody who's going to provide awesome value and promote it, that's who I'm going to be going with.
Yes.
So that's something to think about. It's doing for the event host what is going to help them the most, that is therefore going to open additional opportunities for you.
Yeah, you can't just leech off of everybody else. I mean, that's one of the key parts about networking is giving back. And so the presentations themselves, I'm giving back relative to the content, but also because it's easy for me to syndicate or to get the word out through my social media channels, like my LinkedIn group and my website and other channels, and then other people picking it up for me. And then when they pick it up for me to try to give back, to try to give a shout out back to them, it's really key. I'm a small business person. I'm a sole practitioner. I got to promote other small business people. Small businesses are a big part of my clientele, and so it's equally important for me to promote my clients too. And that's one of the ways of doing that.
Yeah. So so far we've covered how to obtain speaking engagements, the best way to get started, and how to think about going through that process. And then we've talked about promoting the speaking engagement, why that's important. We didn't really talk about how to promote it, but you did say that you basically syndicated over your social media. And I think that everybody's different as far as where your channels are for promotion. So if you have a connection at the local paper that you can do a PR piece and share that with the local paper and get the promotion out that way, then that's your thing. If you have a LinkedIn group or a Facebook group, and then that's your thing. If you have a podcast, that's your thing. So you have some sort of channel, even if it's just an email newsletter to your past clients, where you can promote to somebody the event that you're doing or the speaking engagement that you have. So that's really where you should start thinking about going about this. Now, if you don't have any of these channels built, you don't have an audience at all, then I think that it's important for you to think about building one. So you need to have a place where you're able to put your authority out there. It's not just getting on stage, but it's also building that following of people who are actually interested in you. So if you're getting speaking engagements, but you don't have a place for them to follow up with you in a forum somewhere, a newsletter to keep up with you in some way, then your speaking engagement will last a very short period of time as far as the effectiveness. So real quick, this wasn't one of our key points, but what do you think about that, Charles, as far as having a place for them to continue to follow with you? When you do your speaking engagements, do you send them there, and is that part of the overall strategy?
Yeah, I send them there. When I do the one-on-one networking, especially with other attorneys, I tell them about it, because the fact is, honestly, I could brag about doing presentations at Chicago City Hall. So yeah, it's very important to get that I get the word out any way I can, besides even social media and through other channels. It's really key. It's all network marketing and soft sell, and it's crucial.
Yeah, and I think at the end of the day, one of the key points that you made at the beginning, as far as getting on the stage in the first place, that it's a direct connection. It's a personal connection. This is all about building personal connections. And if there's no way for them to continue that personal connection, just think back to friends from your childhood. How many friends did you have in elementary school that you still talk to today? The reason that you don't, and you don't barely even remember their names or don't remember their names, is because you didn't continue that connection over time. So you have to think that way and build that into your life and your practice, and have a method of staying in front of people and having them remember your name. Imagine if they get an email once a month from you after your presentation. So you got them to give you your email address, and now every month you're sending them an email that's informative. That's at the end of the day, whether they're reading it or not, they're still seeing your name come through the inbox every month, and it just triggers, and they remember, oh yeah, he's the guy who spoke at this event, and I remember him. And now when an opportunity arises, they're going to remember to come back to you.
And one point to make too, and something I've started doing over the last few years in my presentations, I actually use the presentations to when I try to get people there, I tell them that maybe some other people there who they want to meet will be there. And then I'll make introductions to them, like prior to the presentation itself or after the presentation. So I use it to help make networking introductions for other people. It's something that sort of then it kind of snowballs and builds upon itself. Interestingly enough, I've never had a city official attend my presentations at City Hall, but I found out for my next one coming up that there will be a city official there December 18th. So that's going to be kind of interesting.
Yeah, I wonder what that's going to do for you as well. So we might have to follow up and after that happens, and if it actually is a positive influence in your practice or further speaking engagements, then I'd like to have you back on the podcast so we can do that follow up with our audience.
Sure.
All right, so let's move on to the next point, which is developing handouts and materials. How important is it to have handouts and materials when you do a talk, and what goes into that preparation, and how can you do it strategically so that you're not spending all your time preparing for these various speaking engagements?
Sure. I don't think the presentation materials are as important as your speaking style. You're there to speak in front of them. You're there not to talk about the presentation materials themselves, or not to lecture off the presentation materials. And that's something I actually say at the start of my presentations, that I won't lecture off the presentation materials. There's a PowerPoint screen, or that they can follow the PowerPoint, and then they can ask questions about, and then there's presentation materials with articles that I've written that are part of the materials, and then they could ask questions about that, or it's a takeaway for them, when they leave, and it's got my contact information and all that. There's a lot of work that goes in, at least on the front end of presentation materials many years ago. A lot of the materials now I recycle and adapt, to update vernacular or lingo, things like that. But, if I'm doing like a wage and hour, a presentation on wage and hour disputes, overtime, minimum wage, Fair Labor Standards Act type stuff, I'll have a guide as to all the different laws that apply on a state and federal level. And then I'll also have like the various agencies that enforce those laws and the various agencies that investigate complaints. And I'll discuss litigation, or maybe I'll lay out some war stories that I have about some cases I've handled involving these types of matters. And then always at the end of my presentation materials is a summary of me, a bio, along with a photo of me. So that's always key to have too.
Now, are you able to track in any way or gauge somehow what effectiveness that those handouts have? In other words, how many people are taking that back to their office and actually putting you in their Rolodex, at joining your group, signing up for your email newsletter if you have one? Do you have any idea what that rate looks like? Because I know when I leave a talk, very often the papers never even make it back to my office. They'll sit in my car, they'll end up in the garbage somewhere. Not that I it's not important, but for the person, but that was speaking. It's just that what am I going to do with it after? You know what I mean? So I'm just wondering if we had some data on that, so we can highlight that. But
I don't track it.
That's fine.
And honestly, I don't think. In all honesty, I don't think it has, like I said, I don't think it has that great of an impact. It definitely doesn't have as great of an impact as my presentation and speaking style. But marketing is multiple touches. It takes a lot of points of contact with a prospect to get in the front door and to close the business with them. And it's a part of that. And I think in some respects, it is a key element of that, although it's not as key from the presentation standpoint. It's not as key as public speaking style and presentation style. So it's important. It provides touches. It's something when I'm talking with people or emailing back and forth, I could send them the materials themselves, especially if they're asking me, if it's a prospect who's asking me questions about a topic they have given a presentation on. So they know that I'm more of an expert in this area of law, this field, whatever. So yeah, it becomes important, but it's not as important as the presentation style or the public speaking style. And it's never as important as my reputation, with my clients and other attorneys or practitioners and professionals.
And we're going to go right into presentation style because it seems like that is a really important topic for us to talk about. But before we do, I want to share a little ninja trick. So I don't know how many of you are active on LinkedIn, but LinkedIn, the app on your phone, the mobile app, whether you have an Android or an iOS, has a feature called Find Nearby. And if you're not familiar with it, when you go into the app and you go to the people icon and you choose to add a person, one of the options you have is to turn on Find Nearby. And Find Nearby will actually put out a beacon from your phone to people near you to say, hey, I'm in this room with you. And then they can go and click connect, and vice versa. You can do that. But as a speaker, one of the things that you can do is when you get on stage, you can say, look, I'd love to connect with each of you and stay connected after this event. I'm active on LinkedIn. For any of you that are active on LinkedIn and have the LinkedIn app on your phone, what I'm going to do is I'm going to put my phone into Find Nearby. Here's how you do it. And please connect with me so that we can follow up after the event. And what happens is you might walk away with a number of new one-on-one connections from that event that you might not have even been able to touch base with while you were there. But now you can have a follow-up plan where you can directly message them. If you have a group, you can invite them into the group, and then they're there. And now when you post on social, they're connected with you. They're going to start seeing your posts, and you build that relationship. So there are other tools that you can use, but that's a really easy one to use in a networking event when you're on stage to create those connections.
I wasn't aware of Find Nearby. So I do talk about LinkedIn at my presentations, my group, I mentioned it, but I wasn't aware of that. Thanks. That's an amazing point.
Thank you. So try it. I wonder, I'd like to see how that works for you. Okay. Presentation style. Charles, take it away. Talk to us about the style of presentation, different styles. What style is best? Is there a best style? Is it just what's best for you?
I think it's what's best for you it's what works best with your personality. frankly. But what works best for me is I could say in one word, extemporaneous. I just speak kind of off the cuff, off my from my gut. I don't lecture. Like I said, if I had a lecture, I may even put myself to sleep. So it's not. I just don't like lectures. I've been to law school, grad school, college. I've had enough of that. This is much more engaging. It's also it also helps me with my litigation style because it's talking extemporaneously, and that's something I have to do in front of judges, arbitrators, and other regulatory agencies. So it kind of works. One hand washes the other in that respect. So I just stand in front of people. There's no podium. I don't use that. I stand in front of them. I sometimes walk among the crowd, back and forth, side to side, because if somebody asks me a question from one side of the room, then I drift over to that side of the room. And then if they ask a question from another side of the room, I'll drift back to that side of the room. I ask people to raise their hands if they have a question, and if a lot of people raise their hands, and I try to acknowledge all of them and say, I'll get to you in a second, I'll get to you in a second, I'll get to you in a second. If somebody interrupts, I interrupt, I let it go. I tell people they can interrupt me. That's a key thing. It doesn't bother me if people interrupt me. It's because frankly, it helps me focus on what's relevant to them. And if I'm talking over their heads, it's just going to be a terrible presentation. So I tell them, interrupt me, because especially if I start going far afield of what they want to learn or what they want to hear about, then it helps me if they focus me back in on the unrelevant subject matter.
Yeah, that's a good point.
And joke, have a sense of humor too.
Yeah, and what about involving the audience? You mentioned that you prefer the Q&A style, which I imagine has a very heavy audience involvement. But if you're doing a presentation that's not Q&A style, do you have any tips on how to involve the audience so that they're not sleeping at the wheel there?
Yeah, sometimes I have to like cajole them, and I'll sit there. I'm practically begging. I'm like, come on. I'm like, you got to have something you want to know about this. You got to, and then maybe I'll just throw off topics off the top of my head. You want to know about this? Sexual harassment. You want to know how to conduct an investigation, how to write a job description, how to conduct a job interview, things like that, and anything to kind of spur discussion. And usually I would say about half my presentations, people don't start off initially asking questions. I have to really sort of cajole them, coerce them into doing that. And then once I get past that barrier, then things start to roll. That happened at my last presentation on social media, where it was a very large crowd, but it took a 5-10 minutes to get people into questions. But by the time we were into the second half of the presentation, it was like a kind of a free-for-all discussion, which was cool. I mean, that was great.
Yeah, and what I find, and for me, I do a lot of my stuff online. So my experience is people commenting like on a Facebook Live, or people, and you can be there and there's people there and nobody's commenting and it feels dead, and it's not a good feeling. And when you're in person and you have the same thing, it's not a good feeling knowing that you've got all these people in front of you and you just can't elicit a response. So what I find, what I do in those moments is I ask a question that everybody knows the answer to. So I might say, raise your hand if you're native here in Chicago. Raise your hand if you're a practicing attorney. Raise, like something that you'll get most of the room who know your crowd, and you'll get a response out of them, because it breaks the ice and it gets them used to responding to you. And now the next question you ask, they're going to be more comfortable raising their hand, asking. So if it's dead, if you're not getting responses, you can always go back to a basic question. And adding humor into it is fine. If you want to just throw age into the mix, or throw your something about your religion, or it could be completely off topic, and just to get people to pay attention and be like, oh wait, where is this going?
Being self-reviewing, I think reviewing something about yourself personal that people wouldn't normally get from a conversation with you is important, and it helps you to relate to them. Pop culture references. Fortunately for me, because it's a workplace, I do workplace type stuff. The Office is the most popular show on Netflix, and is one of the more popular shows on basic cable. So a lot of people know The Office, so it's easy to talk about things that Michael Scott would say that everybody shouldn't do. Things like that, or to talk about cases I've handled, especially cases within the city of Chicago, and dealing with regulatory agencies in Illinois, because everybody, I think, has had, whether they're consumer or business owners, had some sort of interaction with a regulatory agency. So, discussing those types of stories is important. how, the fact that I get frustrated talking with regulatory agencies, or sometimes I get frustrated talking with judges or arbitrators, and how I handle that frustration, or sometimes how I'll even, almost yell at a judge, or I've done that before. So, and discuss that judges and arbitrators and all these people, the regulatory agencies, they're human beings too, although half the time they don't seem like it. But, you try to relate those stories to them, and that kind of gets the conversation flowing better too.
Yeah, absolutely. And I just want to go back to one word that you said, which is stories. Stories are really important.
Yeah.
Stories attract people. People resonate with them. They're able to put themselves into the story. They're able to create that affinity with the character in a story. So the more stories you can put into your talk, the more engaging your talk would be.
Yes.
So, always think about how you can relate back to a story, whether it's a personal story or just a story you've heard somewhere that you can throw in. All right, Chuck, as we're getting to, I'm sorry, I called him Chuck. So Charles goes by that. It goes by Chuck as well. As we're getting into the final moments of this session, I want to go to what happens if somebody asks you a difficult question? What do you answer it? Do you just tell them that that's beyond the scope of your talk? Like, how do you handle that? And where do you take it?
There's a few ways. First of all, if I don't know the answer to something, I just say I don't know the answer. It's not in my area of expertise, and I'm not going to guess. Maybe I could tell them how to formulate a search for Google if they're really interested and want to check it out themselves. If it's something that I know the answer to and is off topic, I'll say it's off topic, and so I'll answer the question really quickly, succinctly, but I'll also qualify it by saying, now, I'd like to get back on the topic because other people there may not want to discuss this other, the question that they had. But I never like to blow it off, and I never like to act arrogant and say I won't answer that. There's always some sort of answer that is that's congenial, amiable, and it helps to further engage the audience. So I try to do that.
Now, do you ever tell them, give them that brief answer and explain that it's off topic, but a longer answer would be appropriate, and then invite them to find you after the session to talk about it or to connect with you? Okay,
yeah,
perfect.
I tell people that I stick around after my presentations for a while. In fact, I stick around for as long as people will stick around. So if there's people there half hour after a presentation, I'll stick around and talk with them, because honestly, I just never know where referrals and business will come from. And a lot of these presentations, I'm talking with people at sort of like a ground floor level. They're just starting a business or thinking about starting a business. And for me, this is one way to start engaging them, as opposed to where they try to find an attorney off of Google or Yellow Pages or whatever else. So.
Gotcha.
Never. I never be mean, and just like I interrupted you, I try to never interrupt them. So it's one of those do as I say, not do as I do sort of things.
Gotcha. And then just disruptions, coughing, sneezing, phone ringing. What is there anything to do about that? Does it throw you off your game? And how do you overcome it? Do you say anything to the people? I imagine that like something like cell phones, that's a matter of building a habit of asking people at the beginning to be respectful of everyone else in the room and please put their phones on vibrate or silent. What ideas do you have there to share with us?
Sure. So fortunately for me, other organizations set up my presentations for me, so they'll be the ones who are like the cell phone police, at least at the start. So I don't mess with that myself. And also, let's face it, I mean, people get emergencies, things like that, or sometimes they lose interest for a couple minutes and they'll drift away and check out their cell phone, then they'll come back. And in all honesty, and I'm embarrassed to say this, I've even seen some people in the front row of presentations fall asleep. So, it's... frankly, I used to fall asleep at lectures too, so I'm kind of sympathetic to that, and I'll let it go. I've even made some jokes to them, like, sorry if I scared you there. I scared you back into consciousness, things like that. If somebody's sneezing a lot, I'll say Gesundheit. If somebody is coughing a lot, I may say, hey, you might want to exit the room because none of the rest of us don't want to get sick, and I don't want to be responsible for that. And frankly, I don't want the last thing somebody remembering about attending my presentation is that they got sick at the presentation. So, can you step out for a few minutes and then come back? People coming late. one of the things I do with people coming late is, and I don't mind it, it doesn't bother me, but I'll make sure that they get my presentation materials, because they might walk past the table or walk past where the presentation materials are at. So I'll make sure that they get the presentation materials. And sometimes I'll even go into the audience and personally hand it to them myself. That's one way for me to further engage the audience, is to, to walk among the audience then and give them the materials.
Right.
I've had people bring in children, like their kids, and I recognize that, people are working parents or working guardians or siblings. They'll bring their sister or brother, and they'll bring a service dog. That's fine. I mean, whatever works for them, as long as they're attending and asking me some questions. I really don't care about that type of stuff. If there's a major disruption, I've never had a major disruption like violence or like threats or anything like that. That's never happened. But one of the things I try to promote about my style and myself as an attorney is that I'm a leader. Mm-hmm. And I think being an effective leader is also part of being an effective presenter. And you have to sort of, to some extent, take control of the audience, but obviously with a Q&A sort of presentation, you're not taking control. I think what you're doing is somewhat directing the flow more than anything else. Sort of like a quarterback, an NFL quarterback maybe is a good analogy. So, I'm trying to control the flow to the, so if things start getting far afield discussion-wise, I'll say, hey, can we get back to the topic? Especially if I sometimes see people who are getting upset with other people in the audience, and I'm sensitive to that. I try to recognize that, and then I'll see that, okay, if this keeps going this way, I may lose control of the entire presentation. So
yeah. So I think what I'm hearing you say is that it's really important to be in tune with the audience and in tune with what's going on around you. And that could be very difficult when you're trying to focus on your subject matter and delivering it in a good and effective way, which goes back to my point much earlier in the session. Start small, because these are skills you're going to build over time. And although some of you may be litigators, which Charles has indicated would mean that you already are a natural at public speaking, you're comfortable in the front of the room. But at the same time, speaking in front of a room like this is different than in the courtroom. And it's, there are these components of reading the audience and paying attention to what's going on that takes getting used to. And one of the things, there's a group called Toastmasters, which allows you to go and practice your speaking skills and helps teach you how to be more engaging, how to properly engage the audience and pay attention to these things and the body language you use and stuff like that. There's also speaking coaches. So if you're starting to drive some significant business from public speaking, then maybe it's worthwhile investing in a speaking coach who can really take your speaking and the way that you present and the way that you present yourself to another level, and really polish it up. And it could be, if that's your main marketing thing, then maybe that's where your marketing dollars are getting spent, is in improving your stage presence. So
I've never done Toastmasters, but I have heard outstanding things from everybody I know who's been involved with them. So
yeah, you've done a ton of learning from experience, I'm sure. My guess is that where you are today is a totally different presenter than you were when you first started.
To an extent. I think I'm looser than when I first started, like more comfortable. But even then, when I first started doing them, I was a little bit, maybe I was a little bit stiffer. One also tactic I'd like to mention, and I don't do this at all my presentations. I do this in maybe a third to a half of my presentations, is ask the audience to introduce themselves. Ask the audience to say who they work for, where they work for, what they do, because that helps me focus it too. So, that could be a very important tactic at presentations.
Okay, awesome. So we're at the end of the session here. We covered our 5 main points. Once you chose that this is a marketing tactic for you, that you want to do presentations, you want to do public speaking, this is the thing that is going to help you build your relationships and move your law practice forward, build your business. And we covered obtaining the engagements, promoting the speaking engagements, developing your handouts and materials. We covered your presentation style and dealing with difficult questions and interruptions. Charles, for somebody who has sat through this session and really wants to make this a focal point of their 2020 marketing efforts, what is one key piece of advice that you can share with them as they get started on this journey?
Be persistent, don't give up, but also don't be obnoxious and rude. Because if you're obnoxious and rude trying to pitch a presentation, the people you're pitching to are going to think you're going to be obnoxious and rude in front of the audience. So you really want to be careful about that. And you want to counter that also with being true to yourself. Being comfortable with your own personality, being comfortable in your own skin, and then letting that all hang out at the presentation itself.
Yeah, and I love that. I love that advice, and that triggered one thing for me, and that is when you're looking to book your first presentations, don't forget your existing network. Your existing network probably knows somebody who's got a stage for you to be on. So reach out to your existing network and say, hey, this is something I'm going to be doing. This is the list of topics that I can do it on. If you know any opportunities for me to get in front of people, I would appreciate if you made the introduction.
Yeah.
That could be an easy way to get your first land your
Definitely.
first few gigs. All right, so I want to share with you how to follow up with Charles after this, and quick announcement, and then we will wrap it up. So charlesakruegel.com is his website. If you want to connect with him and send business his way, get his advice on anything, connect with him there as well. He's very active on LinkedIn. His LinkedIn group is Charles Kruegel's Labor and Employment Law and Human Resources Practices Group. And Charles, thank you so much for an amazing session. I think this was actionable. It was information packed. I really enjoyed it, and I hope that you did as presenting it as well.
I always like to hear myself talk, Moshe. That's
Awesome.
my hobby.
Well, that's maybe that's the number one key that we didn't talk about. If you like to hear yourself talk, this is the thing for you. And if you
I don't know about
then...
that actually. That might be then, because then you'll come across as conceited and self-centered, and that's probably not the image you want to present. You want to portray as a presenter. So.
Yeah. So some housekeeping stuff. Every night we do a live Q&A. Some of our speakers are panelists on that Q&A. So tonight, what is the time? 9 p.m. Eastern is the Q&A session. And you can post your questions. There's a thread in the Facebook group for today's track. You can post your questions there in advance. Even if you can't make it live, we'll cover those questions that are posted there. And then if you can make it live, you can ask your question live and have it answered live. So we invite you to attend our live panel tonight. And if you're watching this on the replay through the All Access Pass, obviously you've missed that, but the Q&A is recorded in there for you. So once again, Charles, thank you very much for being here. And
thank you, Moshe.
I'll catch you on a follow-up on the podcast, because I can't wait to hear the update on your public official and using the Find Nearby feature on LinkedIn.
Yeah.
So we've got some things to cover in a follow-up episode. So if you're not subscribed to the podcast, Profit with Law, search in any podcast directory, you'll find us.